Welcome to Cold Case Mystique. In today's video, we're diving into a collection of intriguing cold cases that have baffled investigators for years. We'll explore the mysterious details, the twists and turns, and the latest updates that might just crack these cases. Let's unravel these mysteries together. Lisa Holm. A video of a countdown clock named 13 was uploaded to YouTube on May 24, 2015, by Lisa Holm. And on June 7, 2015, exactly 13 days later, a 17-year-old Swedish girl called Lisa Holm vanished after working a shift at a cafe in Blomberg, western Sweden. She was discovered dead in a barn a short distance from her home after several days of searching. The youngster was found half-clothed and with tape covering her mouth, even though an autopsy revealed she had not been sexually molested. Given that she vanished exactly 13 days after the video was uploaded, a lot of people think that the film was uploaded by her murderer and was intended to symbolize the countdown to her death. Additionally, other witnesses said they saw a message indicating the owner of the channel had uploaded a second private video and had purportedly commented with a drawn map, which some speculate may be connected to an unsolved homicide. Police asserted that there was no connection between the video and the case, calling it a coincidence. In the end, a DNA test revealed that the blood on Lisa's clothing belonged to a 31-year-old guy named Beslanowitch. There were also traces of his semen in the barn. His attorney, Inger Ronbag, testified during the trial that her client had been in the barn a few days prior with a minor cut on his hand, and that cut might have ended up on Lisa's clothing when it fell to the ground. Furthermore, she maintained that few days prior to the incident, her client had engaged in some masturbation in the barn where he occasionally worked. But the judge convicted him of the crime and gave him a life sentence. The YouTube video was never brought up in the case, and it's unclear whether it has any actual connection to the crime or if it was just a coincidence. If you're fascinated by true crime and enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up to stay updated on all our latest content. Moving on to the next case. Crystal Lynn Beslanowitch. A young woman named Tracy Beslanowitch informed her partner Chris on December 4, 1955, that she was heading to the nearby Circle K for dinner. But Chris started to worry when she didn't get home by 11 p.m. It wasn't as though Tracy had abandoned ship. She was always in contact with her boyfriend. Chris, despite his being, did not phone the police right away. Rather, he went around to neighbors' doors and knocked on them to see if Tracy was there, but she wasn't there. At 8:40 a.m. the following day, a rancher and his son discovered a young woman's nude body 45 miles from Salt Lake City on the banks of the Provo River in Northfield, close to Midway. The case was quickly taken up by the local police department. Though not much was discovered, a pair of socks was discovered carefully folded on a rock. The forensics team also gathered a number of huge, bloody boulders from the area that they thought might have been used as murder weapons. Authorities believe they had a Jane Doe on their hands because the body was found without any clothing or other personal items, such as identification. They did, however, have one benefit. They drew out the many tattoos of the unnamed victim in the hopes that someone would come forward after seeing them on the television. The strategy was successful. Chris called the police as soon as he realized the tattoos were to his girlfriend Tracy. But nothing was what it seemed. After Tracy's father was contacted by the police, he disclosed his suspicions that Jane Doe was actually his 17-year-old stepdaughter, Crystal, who frequently assumed her sister's identity. When Crystal and Chris made the decision to move in together, they had been dating for a little more than a year. The pair had been staying in a motel as they saved up enough cash to move into a more permanent residence. At the age of 15, Crystal's mother Lindy Thorson revealed that her daughter had started using drugs and engaging in sex work. She also mentioned that Crystal always had her arms wide open and a big smile on her face when she returned home. "I never turned her down," I have always cherished her." The revelation that Crystal's body, not Tracy's, was found dead made Chris the top suspect in the eyes of the police. He was, after all, Crystal's boyfriend, the one who had revealed her identity as Tracy. Very strange actions for a defenseless man, but there was a catch. Chris did not have the motivation or resources to carry out this horrifying execution. As the household's primary provider, Crystal gave Chris financial support. It didn't seem possible that he could have traveled the great distance to the location of the dead woman's discovery because he didn't own a car either. 3 days later, when authorities learned about a taxi driver named Herb Fry who was well known for his obsession with Crystal, they believed they had hit gold. According to reports, he even said, "Nobody can have her if I can't." But there was also no proof connecting him to the crime. As the years went by, the investigation became less active, but investigators never forgot about Crystal. Detective Todd Bonner, who initially worked the case, said that it followed him for the rest of his career. By 2008, new methods had enabled forensic experts to extract Crystal's DNA from rocks discovered near her body, and the murder weapons also included traces of an unidentified guy. Neither Herb Fry nor Chris could have matched it. Then, in 2013, after 5 years, a brand new DNA tool was made accessible. Authorities were able to extract a complete DNA profile from the pebbles discovered at the scene by using the MVAC on them. The cops received a hit after running the profile through Cody's. Joseph Michael Simpson's DNA was found in the sample. Law enforcement watched Simpson for several days until he threw away a cigarette, which allowed them to positively identify him as their perpetrator. That following year, Todd Bonner, who is currently the county sheriff, followed down the criminal and traced him down to Florida so he could be handcuffed. Simpson had a colorful criminal past that included multiple drug-related charges. The most noteworthy aspect, though, is that he was only granted parole 8 months prior to this after serving a murder sentence. He had been detained since 1987 and had served 8 years in prison for the offense. Simpson was found guilty on September 29, 2016, of killing Crystal Beslanowitch. Without the possibility of release, he was sentenced to life in jail. Nothing can ever fully ease the anguish of losing a child and a brother, but at least justice was served, and the killer who almost got away with it is now permanently removed from society. Moving on to the next case. Linda Slaton. Linda Slaton, age 31, resided in Lakeland, Florida. Tim, who was 12, and Jeff, who was 15, were her 2 boys. Judy Butler, Linda's sister, had come to their house early on September 4, 1981, so the two could have coffee. Judy, however, discovered her sister's body when she got there and immediately dialed 911. Linda was lying on the bed, her neck encircled with a wire hanger. She had been choked and beaten. Her 2 sons had to hear the news from the investigators when they got on the site. When they discovered Jeff dozing off in the living room, they told him to get dressed and head outside. After stepping outdoors, Jeff noticed television crews, what appeared to be every Florida police officer, and his Aunt Judy, who was sobbing. Judy then informed him of Linda's situation. An officer woke up Tim, Linda's other son, in the second bedroom. Tim walked by his mother's closed bedroom door, still in his pajamas. Then a cop emerged from the room and the door sprang open, and he observed the entire scene of the crime. Investigators surmised that the culprit had broken through the screen and entered Linda's bedroom window. On the windowsill, they discovered a palm print as well. In addition, they extracted DNA from her body that belonged to an unidentified guy. Subsequently, detectives made an effort to find out more about Linda in order to determine whether or not her acquaintance was the culprit. Frank Slaton, Linda's ex-husband, was examined. When she was 24 years old, in 1974, she filed for divorce. Being a violent drunk, he would become aggressive and strike Linda. He was an asshole, but investigators were unable to connect him to the crime. Jeff Slaton was another person that investigators examined. They conducted several interviews with him, but were unable to establish his guilt either. Investigators investigated Joe Mills as well. Tim's high school football coach was Mills, a 20-year-old. Following her divorce, Linda found it difficult to find employment, sewn her own clothes to save money, and was unable to purchase a car. Then, each day, Mills drove Tim to and from practice. Mills was also unconnected to the crime scene by the investigators. As a fingerprint expert, Sergeant Edgar Pickett was employed by the Lakeland Police Department. It was he who searched the whole crime scene and discovered the palm print on the windowsill. The DNA and palm print extracted from Linda's body were preserved for potential use in the future. Tim and Jeff moved in with Clarence and Margaret Harris, their grandparents. They hardly ever left the house because they were so afraid. Except for Grandpa Harris, they were all sleeping in the same room. He would keep watch over them all night long while brandishing a rifle. The grandparents hoped that their distressed grandsons would feel better quickly and get back into regular habits. Grandsons. After their mother's funeral, the boys returned to school a few weeks later. They chose to concentrate on football. A month after Linda was killed, this picture of Tim's football squad was taken. The picture was hung in Tim's bedroom. He claimed it brought to mind what his mother had taught him, to never give up and to keep going forward. Jeff and Tim have revealed in the past few years that they are still grieving and feeling guilty for not hearing anything that night and for not saving their mother. Investigators have created a complete DNA profile of the individual who killed Linda in March 1999. A match was all that was required. In 2001, Detective Brad Grice took up the case. He obtained numerous DNA samples from previously identified individuals of interest and sent them to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement for comparative analysis. Tim and Jeff then had a meeting with Detective Grice. To clear the brothers once more, he obtained DNA samples from them. In addition, he assured them he wouldn't leave his position until their mother's case was resolved. Another volunteer was Frank Slaton, who had given up alcohol, but none of the samples matched. Then, in September 2001, a tip came in to investigator Grice. A 24-year-old guy called Jimmy Ulmer almost killed a 10-year-old girl by pulling her through her bedroom window about a year after Linda was taken. Ulmer was found guilty of it and given an 80-year prison term. The brutal attack felt a lot like Linda's experience. Detective Grice also learned that Jimmy Ulmer had been visiting a friend who also happened to reside in Linda's flat building at the time of Linda's death. Detective Grice was certain that they had their man, as were Jeff and Tim. Ulmer died in prison in 1996, but his mother gave Grice a sample of his DNA. It was a huge letdown when his DNA did not match the DNA from the crime scene. They seemed to be going back to the beginning. When investigator Grice took over a new cold case team in 2005, he persuaded the FBI to constantly scan the DNA profile through all federal data repositories. However, the years went by without a match. Detective Grice was unable to fulfill his commitment because he had to retire in 2015 due to health issues. But there was still hope when in 2018, revolutionary DNA technology started to excite the police force. Cece Moore, a genetic genealogist, chose to take up Linda's case. In the subject of investigative genetic genealogy, she is a well-known authority. Cece is the reason behind the resolution of numerous unsolved cases. Moore posted the DNA profile on the open genealogical platform GEDmatch. Then she painstakingly built the culprit's family tree, branch by branch. She filled in the names on the family tree by poring over marriage licenses, birth certificates, obituaries, and social media posts. According to Moore, her investigation revealed 3 strands of the offender's family tree, which finally led her to the one individual who was probably in charge. According to her, the 3 genetic networks combined to form a single family tree that pointed to a single direct family. Since he was the only son in the family, The dad had to have contributed DNA. In a single weekend, C.C. Moore was able to identify the man following hundreds of leads, dead ends, and the investigation and clearance of several suspicions. Tim's driver for practice was a man named Joseph Clinton Mills, also known as Coach Joe. Before informing the brothers, the authorities wanted to make sure. Joseph Mills, who was then 58 years old, was living in Kathleen, Florida, roughly 30 minutes away from the crime scene, according to C.C. Moore's final 2019 report. On Linda's investigation were two of the next generation of Lakeland investigators, Detectives Tammy Hathcock and Russell Hurley. After looking over the initial case files, the police discovered that Mills had been interrogated at first, although for a short time. Mills informed them that he had dropped Tim off at his house and was unaware of Linda's whereabouts. Mills was found guilty in 1984 of grand theft for faking a will, according to detectives. Although he was never arrested, he was fingerprinted and had his palm print taken. Investigators compared those prints, taken in August 2019, to the palm prints Sergeant Pickett had removed from Linda's windowsill almost 38 years earlier. A match was made. Mills was determined to be the most likely offender using advanced genetic genealogy, and his identification was further confirmed by a traditional palm print. Hurley and Detective Hathcock still had to match Mills' recent DNA sample to the decades-old DNA found at the crime scene. They returned Mills' trash to the police department in secret. After finding a piece of old medical adhesive tape, they sent it to the crime lab of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement to be tested. When the test results were received 11 days later, it was determined that Joseph Mills was the one who killed Linda Slaton. It was only then that she could tell her sons Jeff and Tim that the monster had, at last, been captured. Tim expressed his admiration for Coach Joe and expressed his dismay at having this old picture of him. What was even more abhorrent was the fact that Mills kept on driving Tim to and from practice even after he killed Linda. Joseph Mills was apprehended by detectives on December 12, 2019. Detective Tammy Hathcock reading him his rights is shown in this photo. It was almost as if he already knew why he was being arrested because he displayed no emotion and made no inquiry. Following the arrest, Tim and Jeff went to personally thank Sergeant Edgar Pickett, who is currently 94 years old, for taking the palm print all those years ago. Mills entered a guilty plea to all charges in 2022. Linda's family asked why he was sentenced. "Why?" Jeff shouted at him in court. "Joe, I simply want to know why. How come you stole my mother from me? I cherished my mother. We were content." All were enraged at Mills's reaction. "I'm a decent person. I'm not the person they have me portraying myself as." Ultimately, Mills received a life sentence without the chance of release in February 2022. "We owe those early crime scene investigators a great debt of gratitude," stated C.C. Moore, "since they were unaware that DNA will be utilized in criminal investigations when this crime was committed. It is crucial that they gathered that, and that department has kept it safe and responsible for all these years. We couldn't have completed our work if that hadn't occurred." According to Jeff and Tim, they're resolved to do the best they can go on and lead fulfilling lives for their mother and their families. The brothers are also aware that without one another, they could not have made it through their tragedy. Living only a few miles away, they maintain an unwavering closeness and share a passion for restoration cars. Jeff and Tim light a candle next to a picture of their mother on her birthdays and frequently go to her grave together. Moving on to the next case. Sophie Sergi. Born in 1973, Sophie Sergi is a native of Pickeys Point, a remote village on the Yukon River in western Alaska. Pickeys Point was mostly populated by Aboriginal people at the time, when the population numbered less than 200. Sophie's childhood in this close-knit community was influenced by the special challenges and natural beauty of rural Alaska. Sophie was imbued with a strong sense of community, family values, and a deep connection to her indigenous origin by the village, which was renowned for its isolation and tiny population. The strong bonds that characterized the way of life among the people who lived in the isolated Alaskan wilderness at Pitcairn's Point were perhaps what made life there so special. Sophie was thought of as a model citizen and a remarkable daughter. Her ambition to achieve her goals and her intelligence and diligence were what characterized her as a person. She developed into a role model in the community, especially for the younger people. Sophie's aspirations went beyond the boundaries of her sleepy village, and she cultivated hopes of making notable life achievements. Sophie's dedication to learning was evident even in the face of obstacles brought on by the far-off location and scarce resources. She was fortunate enough to obtain a full scholarship to the University of Alaska, a famous school that required her to move almost 500 miles from her hometown. The university's dynamic and culturally varied atmosphere replaced the tight-knit indigenous community, marking a momentous change. Sophie was fascinated by the wonders of the water, and her academic interests at the university were centered around marine biology. Even though Sophie was doing well in school, she had a life-changing event that forced her to put her college career on hold for a while. This choice was made for two reasons. At first, Sophie felt a strong feeling of obligation to her family, especially her ailing mother, and a strong want to return home to take care of them. She also decided to work and save money for necessary dental treatment after realizing the financial constraints that come with her scholastic journey. During her time off from university, Sophie worked as a teaching assistant at a school in her community of origin. This decision showed her commitment to giving back to the community and her excellent work ethic. By managing her finances and making an effort to save money for her dental procedure rather than depending on her relatives, Sophie demonstrated her self-reliance and accountability. She intended to re-enroll in college after completing her 2 years of studies in marine biology, signifying her unwavering commitment to realizing her academic goals. But in April 1993, Sophie's life tragically changed on a weekend trip to Fairbanks. On April 25, 1993, Sophie took a plane to Fairbanks for a dentist visit. It appeared to be a typical day with routine activities. She intended to stay with her friend Shirley, a University of Alaska Fairbanks student who lived in the dorm Bartlett Hall. Sophie went out with friends that night, having dinner and a movie, and participating in activities that reflected the lifestyles of a great deal of college students. In what is believed to be Sophie's final known snapshot, she is shown smiling broadly and appearing ready to welcome the world as she embarks on a sunset viewing excursion. After making her way back to Shirley's room in Bartlett Hall, Sophie enjoyed a laid-back evening with Shirley and her boyfriend, Noah, while watching films. Sophie went to the common area later in the evening for a drink and then settled on a smoke. Shirley suggested that Sophie smoke in the bathroom on the second floor to escape the bitter cold in Alaska. Sophie consented, and Shirley and Noah made the decision to alert Sophie of their outing by leaving a note on the door while she was away. They had no idea that their decision would inadvertently deepen the mystery surrounding Sophie's abduction. When Shirley got back to her dorm room the next morning, Sophie was nowhere to be seen. Shirley called the police to report her friend Sophie missing because she was worried and couldn't find any evidence of her. Simultaneously, without being aware of the tragedy that was transpiring in Fairbanks, Sophie's orthodontist called Sophie's family to inquire about her absence from a scheduled visit. As the day went on, a caretaker in charge of the Bartlett Hall second-floor lavatory discovered something unsettling. After a vicious attack that included binding, gagging, tasering, beating, stabbing, and finally a gunshot to the back of her skull, Sophie Sergi's body was found in the bathtub. With Sophie's clothes all tattered and her corpse drenched from the water, the crime scene perfectly captured the brutality of the deed. The University of Alaska Fairbanks community was shocked by the discovery, and local authorities launched an inquiry right once. Because of the shock and amazement caused by Sophie's brutal murder in a college dorm, there are now more security measures and student mental health resources available. Following the discovery of Sophie's body on April 26, 1993, detectives, forensic experts, and law enforcement personnel descended upon the dorm to carefully examine and record every aspect of the crime scene. To bring the criminal to justice, a thorough investigation was required due to the seriousness and savagery of the murder. Authorities collected evidence after carefully searching the loo for any DNA, hair samples, and fingerprints. Even with 1993's forensic technology limitations, investigators recognized the value of saving these samples for potential breakthroughs in DNA analysis down the road. The fact that there was no alcohol or illegal drugs in Sophie's system upon autopsy emphasizes how heinous the crime against her was. An essential part in piecing together the circumstances leading up to Sophie's death was eyewitness testimony. Later on, two students, Vanessa Allen and Jennifer Roy, gave insightful information. During the semester, Vanessa lived in the dorm and described how she felt nervous the night of April 25th when she went into the rarely used East Side lavatory. She became suspicious when she saw the light in the tub room was on, as it was not a frequent occurrence. Vanessa noticed sparks coming from the adjoining room, something akin to firecrackers. Jennifer Roy, a senior who was about to graduate, was also studying late in the dorm on the west side. At about 1:30 a.m. on Monday, she noticed different noises coming from the other bathroom through the shared wall. Jennifer heard something rustle, something loud thud against the wall and someone mumbling, and she assumed it was a guy and a female. Witness statements, forensic evidence, and the graphic details of Sophie's attack led to a greater attempt to locate and capture the attacker. The inquiry ran into difficulties because college campuses are temporary places where some students leave for the semester and never come back. It was difficult to track down people to question because room assignments were always changing, and the dorm roster was not always accurate in reflecting who lived there. By interviewing witnesses and following up on leads, investigators want to piece together the sequence of events that took place the night of the attack and reduce the window of time between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. when Sophie was killed. The Sophie Sergi case became a cold case over time, one that investigators periodically looked at. As forensic tools advanced, especially in DNA analysis, authorities took advantage of the chance to reevaluate the evidence. The emphasis turned to utilizing the preserved DNA samples in an attempt to identify the person who killed Sophie in a terrible manner. 2018 saw a breakthrough in the development of DNA testing capabilities. Through the use of contemporary DNA analysis, the preserved samples allowed detectives to create a suspect's genetic profile. The possibility of discovering a match could be greatly increased by comparing this profile to DNA databases. The determination to use cutting-edge forensic tools and the persistent pursuit of justice were crucial in resolving Sophie's case. A crucial part was performed by genetically determined DNA analysis, an increasingly popular technique for cracking stale cases. By comparing DNA from the crime scene with genetic databases that are accessible to the general public, this technology may be able to identify familial links. The use of genetic DNA analysis has been crucial in identifying suspects in cases that have languished unsolved for many years. When Maine resident Stephen Downs became the main suspect, the investigation took a significant shift. Subsequent inquiry showed that Downs was living in the dorm where Sophie was tragically murdered while attending the University of Alaska Fairbanks at the time of the brutal attack. Downs was detained even though he denied having any relationship to Sergei during his 2019 interrogation. This was because his DNA unmistakably matched the sample taken from Sergei's remains decades earlier. Later, he was extradited from Maine, where he was employed as a nurse. Prosecutors built a strong case against Downs by gathering evidence during the trial that connected him to the location of the crime. Important witnesses, such as Vanessa Allen and Jennifer Roy, gave compelling testimony about what happened the night of the attack and gave important insights into what transpired. The main focus of the trial was piecing together Sophie's tragic death by using the memories of people who were in Bartlett Hall on that fatal night. The pursuit of justice for Sophie Sergi and her grieving family was aided greatly by the testimony of witnesses and the developments in forensic technology. When the trial finally came to an end, Stephen Downes was given a sentence of 75 years in jail for the attack that claimed Sophie Sergi's life. The horrific death of Sophie has left a lasting impact, even though justice has been delivered. The tragic events of 1993 altered her friends' and family's life forever, even though they were able to find closure almost 3 decades later. The path from an unsolved cold case to Stephen Downes' capture and conviction serves as an example of how genetic genealogy may be revolutionary in providing victims with justice and comfort to bereaved families. Moving on to the next case. Mitrice Richardson. Born on April 30th, 1985, to Ladis Sutton and Michael Richardson, Mitrice Richardson is a bright and successful young lady. The turbulent relationship between the pair finally resulted in their breakup. Furthermore, Mitrice was reared primarily in Covina, California, by her mother and stepfather, Larry Sutton. Mitrice attended South Hills High School and graduated with honors. In 2008, he attended California State University in Fullerton and earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology. She worked part-time as an attendant at an LGBTQ+ strip club and as an intern for a forensic psychologist in the year 2009. Some stories state that Mitrice had broken up with her 2-year girlfriend when she vanished. When 24-year-old Mitrice walked into Jeffrey's restaurant in Malibu on September 16, 2009, she started acting strangely, according to the staff, as she was eating a steak and sipping a martini. She made an attempt to join a nearby table where people were chatting incoherently about astrological signs. After that, she went back to her own seat to finish her meal, but she later came back to the table to tell everyone that she was going to Hawaii and would get in touch with them when she got there. The party that thought her strange but not unpleasant or bothersome departed shortly after. When Mitrice tried to leave as well, the manager stopped her and asked her how she planned to pay her $89 charge. Mitrice insisted that the group ought to have covered her expenses, but the employees refuted her assertion. The 24-year-old then mentioned that she was from the planet Mars and that she should use sex to pay off her debt. Mitrice took a joint and emptied her pockets, searching for whatever cash she could have on her person. She sounds pretty weird. So the restaurant workers phoned the cops at this point. There's a chance she's high. After receiving the call, the LA County Sheriff's Department determined her status. They found that she was not inebriated or under the effect of drugs after giving her a sobriety test. After that, Mitrice was taken into custody on suspicion of not paying for the dinner and of having less than 1 ounce of marijuana in his hands. Before they departed the scene, the arresting cops said that the 24-year-old had locked her car with her belongings, including her purse, cell phone, and cash. Next, the vehicle was transported along the Pacific Coast Highway to a tow yard. About 10 miles up Malibu Canyon, at the Lost Hills Sheriff Station, Mitrice was taken into custody and given literature. Mitrice made 4 attempts to phone her great-grandmother after being arrested. She had committed the number to memory alone. Although Mitrice informed the police that the phone never rang, the cops claimed to have heard her conversing. It is impossible to determine who was right in this situation because the usual pay phone that was being used had malfunctioned, thus the calls were placed on a non-recording line. Mitrice's mother was extremely worried when she learned that her daughter had been imprisoned. The 24-year-old was informed by station personnel that he would not be allowed outside until the morning. But that's not what actually happened. Mitrice was released at 12:28 a.m. She was alone in a place she didn't know, without any of her belongings, and without a way to return home. She was freed because, according to a police spokeswoman, she showed no indications of being drunk or mentally sick. It is also said that the young woman refused to wait in the lobby. Bill Smith, a former news anchor, noticed the 24-year-old in his garden around 6:30 a.m., some hours later. Smith lived in Monternito, a community of equestrian estates and private hiking trails located approximately 6 miles west of the Lost Hills station at the base of Dark Canyon. Mitrice informed Smith that she was sleeping when he opened his window to check on her. After that, he phoned the police, but by the time they got there, the 24-year-old had left. Officers at the station advised her to wait a few more hours before reporting her missing, even though her mother realized right away that something was wrong. Mitrice was not the subject of a be on the lookout alert until early in the afternoon on the 17th. However, Mitrice vanished from sight, and in the months that followed, no sign of her was found. When her family tried to retrieve the tape from her detention cell after she vanished, LASD Captain Thomas Martin informed them that none existed. There isn't any form of videotape. Later on, he would tell the press. But 4 months later, in January 2010, Martin acknowledged that the recording did, in fact, exist. His desk drawer had it. Interestingly, the captain was promoted and sent to a station more than an hour distant by the end of that month. It took an additional 3 months for the family to finally watch the videotape. The police said that this was because of technological lag. Lattice remembered observing the video and noticing that her daughter appeared restless and upset. The family claimed that the tape had been altered. They were left wondering what was omitted from the original recording as a result. According to reports, Mitrice was spotted carrying a piece of paper 1 second and crumpled on the ground the next. The LASD never provided an explanation for the video's editing. But during the course of the inquiry into Mitrice's abduction and eventual death, the police conducted a number of strange and suspicious acts, of which this episode was just one. The family saw Mitrice depart the station 2 minutes after she did, from a different door, when they watched more footage of her. However, no one at the LASD would give the man's name. Naturally, Michael, Mitrice's father, said, "That makes me suspect. My daughter is the one who leaves the building first, and they don't say anything about him. He may have taken her hostage, offered to drive her to the impound lots, abandoned her, and then returned to get her. Perhaps he missed her. Why have they been hiding him is the key question. It is their responsibility to uncover the facts and get off their donut-eating asses." Mike Kessler, a journalist for LA Magazine, was able to find out who this cop was. It appears that the individual was moved less than 6 months after Mitrice's family saw the video of him leaving the building. The man said, "Unfortunately for you, dude, I wasn't there," when Kessler approached him. After that, he hung up. But Kessler persisted, and he was able to talk to the officer once again. This time, the individual insisted he had no memory of being at the department that evening. He said to Kessler, quote, "I was one of the guys that kept away from this, minding my own business, the night this nonsense happened." The LASD conducted a search on January 9, 2010. In the department's history, it was one of the most extensive searches. More than 300 individuals with search and rescue training took part in an 18-square-mile exploration of Malibu Canyon. The volunteers searched both on the ground and in the air, going over ridges, trails, and creeks. More searches were conducted later that year on June 5th and 6th, with the participation of over 100 private citizen volunteers. Still, searchers were unable to locate Mitrice. On August 9th, 2010, just after noon, rangers in Dark Canyon were investigating a marijuana farm that had just been cleared by the police when they came upon Mitrice's body. The terrain was densely covered with poison oak, difficult stones, and other unpleasant plant debris, and there were no designated footpaths. The corpse of Mitrice was lying above a creek bed. Her body looked mummified. The police were promptly contacted by the rangers. A deputy from Lost Hills showed up at the site about 1:30 p.m. Despite the fact that the coroner should have been notified right away, it was almost 3 p.m. when he was contacted. The coroner was dispatched to the Lost Hills station at approximately 5 o'clock in the evening to await an airlift from a point above the canyon, and 2 investigators were transported to the crime scene around 5:20 p.m. 1 hour and 40 minutes more went on as the coroner waited for the chopper. Later, the police announced that the airlift had been postponed while the helicopter assisted in the hunt for a hiker who had gone missing. Detectives gathered Mitrice's remains at 8 p.m. as the sun was setting and had them transported back to the station. The state code in question, which said that a body could not be disturbed or removed from the location of death without the consent of the coroner or the coroner's designated deputy, and the assistant chief coroner Ed Winter's instructions were disregarded in this case. The LASD had access to the remains for more than 6.5 hours in total before deciding to transport them without the coroner's permission. In an interview with LA Magazine, a former LAPD officer stated rather frankly that removing the body from the scene without the coroner's consent was, quote, ass backwards. It is the responsibility of law enforcement to safeguard the crime scene, he said. A body should never be moved without consent. The coroner received the photos that the rangers who had initially discovered the body had taken. Although they have never been made public, Mitrice's right leg was 2 yards upslope from her body, according to a source close to the investigation who spoke with reporter Mike Kessler of LA Magazine. There was a tunnel through the soft tissue where the femur bone had been removed, as though it had been yanked out rather than by animals. It was really rather strange. The fact that one of her arms was arranged so that it defied gravity and had likely been left so for some time after her death added to the bizarreness of the image. Claire Koff, a forensic anthropologist, has proposed that this was caused by Mitrice's body being covered with something after she passed away. But there were going to be more strange revelations. The coroner's employee authorized Dan McElderry and Kevin Acevedo, the LASD detectives on the scene, to move the skull and examine what was underneath, according to Lieutenant Michael Rawson, who oversaw the investigators on their behalf. According to Rawson, the head was attached and, quote, the entire skeleton is still in place together with the skull. This, allegedly, isn't what the images of the crime scene depict. It is clear from the photos that the skull had already been cut away from the body. Its mandible was missing from its upper torso, and it was resting upside down. Moreover, when the body was relocated, 5 neck bones were absent. They've never been located. Whether Rawson and Captain David Smith, who corroborated his account, were present when the body was transferred is uncertain. The detectives and other officers present at the incident have not been made available for comment. When Mike Kessler emailed asking for feedback, Lost Hills Captain Joseph Stephen responded, saying, "Please do not contact the staff. Your repeated attempts to harass my workers are getting increasingly concerning, and they need to stop right away. We are unable and unwilling to talk to you about this situation." The LASD spokeswoman stated that the agency feels uneasy when journalists get in touch with them and that they have nothing at all to conceal. Even though Mitrice's case was unusual overall, the LASD did not think that a crime had been committed. It was claimed that she might have been allergic to poison oak and experienced an acute response, or that she might have ventured into the region and become one of the 2 individuals in California who die every year from wounds caused by rattlesnakes. They also said that the 24-year-old's clothes had been stolen by animals. The only items she had left close to her body were her trousers, belts, and bra. If the animals had indeed taken her clothes, then they must have also taken off her shoes, unbuckled her belts, yanked it out of the jeans loops, and dragged down her underwear and pants. The list is endless and doesn't seem to hold up. Another officer proposed that the water's currents had taken off her clothes. However, this still doesn't explain why her belt fell loose from her jeans or why her bra unhooked. In addition, if this were the case, the body would have been deposited where it was on the slope above the creek by the water rising 60 feet above the creek bed and pushing it against the river. In this case, another unanswered question is how Mitrice's remains ended up partially mummified. How in the heat had they not broken down completely? Her physique ought to have been reduced to a skeleton after 11 months. When a body is mummified, It usually means that it was placed in sub-zero or extremely dry conditions as soon as possible after death and left there for an extended amount of time. The naked body of a woman who you know was in a vulnerable situation within 2 miles of where she was last seen in an area with which she had no competence in an unexplainable position is in your possession, said forensic anthropologist Claire Koff, who noted Mitrice's positioned arm and informed LA Magazine. In most cases, you would assume that this is a homicide until you can rule it out. She was, on the surface, dead. It sounds like she was kidnapped, killed, and then her corpse was dumped. But Lee Backer, the LASD sheriff at the time, didn't think so. At a press conference, he said, "At this time, there is no indication of a homicide. The remains, in my opinion, are not able to tell us a story." Considering that the coroner's office also seems to have been careless in its duties, this seems like a particularly strange thing to say. The hair that was discovered on the ground next to Mitrice's body was not examined. It's unknown if the 24-year-old owns it or if someone else gave it to her. In addition, some sort of metallic debris and an earring that Mitrice had not been wearing were discovered in her scalp hair, though neither item was examined. Despite the discovery of bug egg casings on the remains, the casings were not investigated further. It's unclear if they originated from an indigenous bug that frequented the region or if they traveled elsewhere. Mitrice's clothing and the plants surrounding her were not checked for signs of trauma, and neither her brain nor her skull were thoroughly inspected for foreign DNA or semen. Her pubic hair was also not tested for these substances. Although the 24-year-old's teeth were claimed to have turned pink, indicating a possible strangulation, this was not verified because the hyoid bone, along with the previously mentioned other neck bones, was still missing. 6 months after the body was discovered, the location was examined once more, but not since. In the months following Mitrice's passing, friends and family visited the spot to erect a memorial and discovered one of her fingers. Sheriff Backer declared in December 2010 that the FBI was going to inspect Mitrice's remains. But it soon became clear that, before Backer's announcement, they had never agreed to do this and had not planned to do so. Even yet, on July 13, 2011, the body was dug up and brought to the LASD crime lab. Nevertheless, it is unknown what was discovered during this inspection. It seems like anything might happen in a scenario this bizarre. Mitrice might have lost her mind and wandered into the woods, or there might be a darker plot underway. Maybe there's more to this story than the cops trying to hide the fact that they failed to act appropriately and were in charge of a mentally ill young woman. Mitrice was bipolar and had not slept for 5 days when she vanished, according to evidence found in her diary and text messages. When she was released from the Lost Hills station that September night, she was probably in excruciating pain. Latice, the mother of the 24-year-old, thinks she was the victim of foul play. She said that Mitrice is not a hiker. "My daughter lives in the city. She didn't stray into that ravine. I think someone used her mental illness, which she was experiencing. She was, in my opinion, slain, possibly raped, and then dumped." No action was taken against the LASD after an independent inquiry of their handling of the matter found that they had acted improperly. But after Mitrice's body was found, her parents filed a lawsuit against the LASD for letting the girl go. Every one of them got $450,000. The matter of Mitrice remains unresolved, and the $10,000 award was just renewed. The LASD's number to report information regarding Mitrice's death is 213-229-1700. Moving on to the next case. Charles Walton. On May 12, 1870, Charles and Emma Walton had a son, Charles Walton. He was a laborer in agriculture who had spent his whole life in the civil parish of Lower Quinton, Warwickshire, England. After losing his wife in 1927, Charles was left a widower in 1945 and shared a home with his 33-year-old niece, Edith Isabel Walton. Charles had taken her in when her mother died in 1915, when she was just 3 years old. Charles was seen as an eccentric and reclusive man, but he was also well-liked by many, who said he was courteous and nice. He made a name for himself as a guy who got along well with both horses and dogs. Although he didn't actively interact and was a little introverted, he didn't have any grudges or ill will toward anyone in the town. Before his death in February of 1905, he had been employed for the last 9 months by a nearby farmer named Alfred Potter. Because of his health, Charles worked the farm when it wasn't raining and chose his own hours. He had arthritis. He frequently worked 4 days a week. Charles went out as usual on Valentine's Day, 1945, with his slash hook and pitchfork. Between 9 and 9:30 a.m., witnesses saw him walk past the churchyard. Charles's work on this particular day was to trim hedges in a field on the slopes of Meehan Hill known as Hill Ground. In the meantime, Edith, his niece, was employed at the Royal Society of Arts as a printer-assembler. She anticipated Charles arriving home at 5 p.m., but Edith soon discovered her uncle wasn't there when she got home at 6. She did not think Charles was just hanging out at the bar or with a friend, not considering his reclusive nature. So she proceeded to her neighbor's house next door, and the two of them traveled to the farm where Charles was employed. Edith was informed by Alfred Potter, Charles's boss, that he had witnessed her uncle cutting the hedges that day. After arriving at the location where Potter had last seen his employee, the three found the mangled body of 74-year-old Charles Walton. Edith was so horrified by the sight that her neighbor had to drag her away. While Alfred Potter stood to watch the body until police arrived, another man who was passing was asked to notify the authorities. This was a grisly crime scene. Charles sustained injuries to his neck from the slash hook after being battered with his own walking cane. The firearm remains embedded in the injuries. He was pinned to the ground by the pitchfork's tines on both sides of his neck. There was a rip in his shirt. His pants were not secured, and his fly was ajar. Although the coroner's records make no mention of it, several sources about the case also claim that a cross was cut into his chest. It was a long wait for the authorities. Members of the Stratford-upon-Avon CID did not show up until much later, even though P.C. Lomasney, the first police officer on the site, arrived at 7:05 p.m. It wasn't until 11:30 p.m. when West Midlands Forensic Laboratory Professor Webster arrived. It was not until 1:30 in the morning that Charles's body was removed from the field. Potter was questioned by officials the next day. He said that although Charles had just recently started working for him for the past 9 months, he had known Charles for the entire 5 years that he had lived on the farm. He disclosed to the authorities Charles's routine of eating lunch at 11 a.m. and working until 4 p.m. On February 14th, Potter had spent the morning with another farmer in the neighborhood bar, the College Arms, until midday. The police soon asked Scotland Yard for assistance. They think the culprit may have been one of the prisoners detained in the nearby Italian and German prison camp established at the beginning of the war. Therefore, they asked to bring an Italian interpreter. To help in the investigation, Scotland Yard dispatched Detective Sergeant Albert Webb and Chief Inspector Robert Fabian. The two came on February 16th with D.S. Sanders, who could speak Italian well. Alfred Potter was soon the main suspect in the detectives' eyes. The first policeman on the scene, who was familiar with the Potters, was advised to keep a careful check on the couple in case they said or did anything that might implicate them. At the nearby camp, which was more like a free roam prison where inmates came and went as they pleased, Sanders, meantime, questioned a few of the Italians. None of the men there, meanwhile, ever developed into credible suspicions. Charles had many broken ribs, bruises across his chest, and a cut trachea, according to the post-mortem examination. In addition, he sustained cuts to his left hand, bruises on the back of his right hand, and forearm from defensive wounds. It was estimated that he passed sometime between 1 and 2 p.m. Potter was informed by Plomercinet a few days later on February 20th that the police were seeking to obtain fingerprints from the firearms. In response, Potter said he had handled the guns and reported this to the authorities. Because Edith's neighbor Harry Beasley had instructed him to make sure Charles was dead, he had touched them. Additionally, Potter informed P.C. Lomesny that a fascist member from the camp was responsible for Charles's murder. Potter and his wife were ecstatic when a serviceman showed up at the farm a little while later to inform them that an Italian had been taken into custody by military police, something the PC was quite suspicious of. More than 500 people who live in Lower Quinton provided statements to authorities. Additionally, they summoned in Royal Engineers who searched the area with mine detectors in an effort to locate Charles's missing pocket watch. Authorities had sent out a description of his pocket watch to pawnbrokers and jewelers the day after his body was discovered, but it was never found. Using the mine detectors, no hints turned up. For a number of reasons, Chief Inspector Robert Fabian thought Alfred Potter was the offender. Just as the cops were drawing near, Potter departed the scene of the crime. P.C. Lomesny thought that although he had earlier complained about the cold, his appearance was more concerned and nervous than anything else. Potter further stated that on the day of Charles's death, he would have visited the man, but he had to tend to a calf that had become stranded in a nearby ditch. But the calf had actually passed away the day before Charles attacked, as the authorities discovered. Additionally, Potter had given multiple accounts of when he'd last seen Charles at work, and each account was different. He stated that he had seen him working at a distance at 12:10, then 12:15, then 12:20, and finally at 12:30 p.m. that he had seen someone. It was also observed by law enforcement that there were no notes regarding him indicating that he had handled the firearms. It was evident that Charles was dead, and Harry Beasley denied charges that he'd told Potter to find out. He clarified that Potter did not come into contact with the guns while he was there. In spite of this knowledge, the authorities were unable to identify a true motivation and did not find any conclusive proof that would have been detrimental. Two of Potter's former employees claimed that he occasionally had trouble paying their salaries, which led others to speculate that Potter and Charles might have been at odds over money. Edith said to the authorities that she had not seen any IOUs and had not heard Charles claim to have lent money to anyone. The investigators reached a dead end since there was no proof to support the claim that Charles was owed money or that there was a disagreement between him and his employer. There have always been many stories of witchcraft and paganism in Lower Quinton Hamlet. The devil allegedly tried to smother the town's recently constructed abbey with a big clod of earth, but the Bishop of Worcester saw him coming and used prayer to change the devil's trajectory, causing the earth to miss the abbey and form Meehan Hill, the exact location where Charles's body was discovered. Stories like these were still common in 1945, as they had been in earlier ages. Just a year prior to Charles Walton's murder, Helen Duncan, a lady who claimed to be able to call spirits, was on trial in Lower Quinton for violating the 17/30/5 Witchcraft Act. Charles had been the subject of rumors for a while before to his passing. A few people were wary of him since they thought he had ruined the harvest the year before by using toads, while others pointed out his strange bond with animals. The whispering indicated that Charles could tame wild beasts and that the birds would feed from his hand and refrain from eating the seeds from his land at his request. We have already talked about Charles's affection for dogs and horses. A Charles Walton was described in the 1929 book Folklore, Old Customs and Traditions in Shakespeareland as having witnessed a phantom black dog on the road while walking home on multiple occasions in 1885. He'd seen the dog with a headless woman on the last night. When he got home, he discovered that his sister was dead. For a very long time, black dogs have been associated with death and Satan in British legend. It is noted, meanwhile, that no documentation exists indicating Charles had a sister who passed away in 18/85. When Chief Inspector Robert Fabian wrote his autobiography in the 1970s, he called the Charles Walton case the witchcraft murder and stated that it was unmistakably the spectral culmination of a paganism ritual. He added that one evening on Meehan Hill, he had an encounter with a black dog. Unsubstantiated reports exist regarding the presence of a black dog hanged up near to Charles's body. A vicious murder occurred in 1875 on an 80-year-old Long Compton resident named Tennant, 15 miles from Lower Quinton. Though this has subsequently been refuted, there is a rumor that she was killed in the same way that Charles was. Although Anne's case also involved the use of a pitchfork, that is where the similarities between the two incidents end, and was murdered in front of multiple witnesses by a guy called James Hayward, who claimed she was a witch. When a BBC reporter in 2014 inquired about Charles's case with Lower Quinton inhabitants, they allegedly encountered a reaction from the community. The villagers' stiff lips were apparent to them. The owner of the College Arms, the bar where Potter had been drinking on February 14, 1945, said to the reporter that discussing it would just agitate people and that it would be counterproductive to cause division in such a tiny community. He also mentioned that there is always someone who knows something in situations like this. Someone knows what goes on, but nobody will talk about it to protect the feelings of family members and to avoid worrying others. Charles's missing pocket watch was found in his outhouse in 1960. The outhouse had been searched extensively in the weeks following Charles's death, which led authorities to surmise that the murderer had returned it for some reason. The horrifying murder of Charles Walton is still unsolved as of right now. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with us. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Your support helps us bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like us to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.